Okay. Um, well, we'll go ahead and just kind of get started with the session today. My name is Naomi Briscoe, and my teammate Kat Hample is joining me here today. I did try to keep this a little bit interactive just so that the team can really experience some of the things that we're going to talk about. So if you have questions, since we still are a relatively small group, you are welcome, or like input, you're welcome to add it to the chat. You're welcome to unmute and just add it that way. Thank you, Sarah. I see you already added to the chat. I appreciate that. That way we can just really have some great dialogue as we're diving into this. Okay. So let's go ahead and get started. Like I said, my name is Naomi Briscoe, and then my teammate Kat is going to kind of look through the chat and make sure that she pauses me if I get too excited and too ahead of myself. Okay, so we kind of just did little introductions, but I am the regional manager for Studies Weekly here in Michigan, and Kat supports me in the process in all the schools that we work with. So as we walk through today, we're going to use Studies Weekly kind of as our platform to dive into this, but really what I wanted to make sure is that everybody walked away with something, even if you weren't a Studies Weekly customer, okay? So you will walk away with some strategies we're gonna use a model lesson. We're gonna focus on 4th grade and protecting Michigan's environment. And then we're just gonna do a deeper dive into Studies Weekly and inquiry in case you did have any questions. And we still have a few people joining us. So we'll just go ahead and let them get going. Thank you if you are just now joining us. We're just kind of doing introductions and talking through what to expect for the agenda today. Okay, so like I said, we're going to save some time at the end to really dive into just what is Studies Weekly, how do we support inquiry, especially here in Michigan, and then some question and answers, okay? So let's go ahead with our first set of questions. So if you don't mind adding to the chat, or like I said, you're welcome to unmute, but how many years of teaching experience are you bringing with you today as we have our conversations? 10 years, wow. Thank you, Frank. 2 years, awesome. 3 years, okay. And then one thing I would like you to kind of just add is, why did you choose to become a teacher? I feel like this is a great question to kind of just kick us off, but why did you decide to become a teacher? And you can just put a few words if that's the easiest. And again in the chat, why did you choose to become a teacher? I had an influential teacher that inspired me. My husband is a retired military. I love it. I told him I wanted to go back to be a teacher. Well, fantastic. And people can continue to add to the chat. I wanted to make a difference. Yes, Stacy, exactly. So I was a middle school teacher in Austin, Texas. I taught for 8 years before I became an instructional specialist. And my reasoning was very much like yours. I had some inspirational teachers, especially social studies teachers, that I really, they made such an impact on my life that I knew I wanted to do something with education. So I really appreciate you all being here today. And I feel like this is an important question to just kind of dive into this, because social studies is so vital to everything we do. Really kind of honing our craft and thinking about different ways to approach it is all really valuable information, right? Okay, so I did ask this question, just how familiar are you with Studies Weekly? Again, the goal of this session is to have everybody walk away with some strategies, not necessarily just to talk about Studies Weekly, but if you are familiar with Studies Weekly, it'd be just really great to just kind of hear from you quickly and get a sense of So yes, thank you, Nicole. This is my second year using it. So awesome. So that way, when we kind of walk through things today, this won't be brand new for you, and just kind of, it will give you a good sense of different ways to kind of run with it. So what I'd like you to do, you don't have to add this to the chat. If you already have, no big deal. But just kind of think through, what is your goal for this session? What would you like to take away from today? You can write it down on a sheet of paper, whatever makes the most sense to you. And then just kind of keep that in mind as we're going through today. And then if we have questions at the very end, if we haven't totally addressed what it was that you're looking for, please feel free to share out, and we'll hopefully answer that at the very end. Okay, so norms. Just as we work through today, I'd love it if you guys could be patient. If there are any technology issues, just be yourself. Again, we're a small group. We're all educators. We all understand what the other is doing day in and day out. So just be yourself, and we'd love to hear from any thoughts, opinions, things like that that you have. And then what is your goal? Think about that goal that we just set. And then at the very end, ask questions. Okay, so we're going to start today by really engaging in Studies Weekly, and we're going to use a model lesson. I say we, Kat and I, we're going to use a model lesson as we walk through this, okay? So I'm just going to dive right into this model lesson. And again, I'm using 4th grade, and I am picking this particular standard just because it's something that I've always been really interested in. And so I wanted to just use this as our example today. But so what I'd like you to do is take a moment, and I would like you to read through this standard, this Michigan standard, on your own. And then I want you to kind of think through just what are some things that the students will need to know based on this standard, okay? So again, take a moment and just see if you can identify some things that they might need to know. Maybe it's vocabulary, maybe it's concepts. What actions are they going to need to do? And then if you don't mind, just adding to the chat just a few things that you noticed, 1 or 2 things. What is something that students are going to need to be able to do or know based on this standard? Vocabulary. Okay, what is threat? That's a good one. Maybe we're looking at vocabulary like natural resources, right? Again, this is 4th grade, so what are natural resources? Oh, thank you. That's exactly what are Michigan's natural resources. Thank you, Nicole. And I just kind of highlighted some of these as everybody's kind of thinking. So I went through, and of course, we're going to want students to describe. So whatever we're getting the students to do at the end of this, we're wanting them to describe. So what are the past and current threats to Michigan's natural resources? So again, what is a threat? What are Michigan's natural resources? What is a natural resource? And then we're going to kind of describe how state, tribal, and local governments, as well as schools and organizations, are all working to protect these natural resources. And then the standards, or the Michigan standards, even give you examples. So like the Flint water crisis, invasive species, loss of sturgeon, wild rice. These are all examples we can use with students, right? So as we move through today, because Michigan focuses so heavily on the arc of inquiry, I'm going to try to pause, and we're going to talk about each one of these dimensions as we're developing and walking through this model lesson. Again, this is a 4th grade lesson, so if I have some folks teaching 5th grade or higher, you can still pull from this, still gain some ideas, but I did just kind of want to emphasize that this is a 4th grade lesson. Okay, so let's take a look at Dimension 1. Dimension 1 is asking us to develop compelling and supporting questions when it comes to planning inquiries. So let's take a moment, and we're going to actually use Jamboard. Some of you are probably familiar with this. I'm going to add it to pull it up on my screen here. It's going to look something like this. Kat also just added it to the chat. Thank you, Kat. She's so on top of it. So here we have this Jamboard. If you're brand new to Jamboard, which I'm sure most of us are not at the moment, but if you are, what you're going to do is you're going to just use the sticky note here, right below the arrow, and add one of your compelling questions. So I added, you'll see here that I have the standard again, but what I would like you to do is just take a sticky note and let's aim for 3 different compelling questions. Just add a sticky note and come up with a compelling question you might ask your class based on the standard. What is a compelling question you could use? Where are most of Michigan's natural resources located? Okay. Ooh, I like this one. What can we do to protect our natural resources? And I'm sorry, thank you guys for helping me. I see I keep dragging it when you're trying to move it out of the way too, so thank you. What's another one? What can we do to protect natural resources? What are the consequences of misuse when it comes to natural resources? Love it. Awesome. So when we're diving into, it can be Studies Weekly, it can be any resource that you're using, it's helpful to really take a look at the standard and then come up with at least one compelling question. Your students can help you with this as well, but just something to guide the lesson for that week, right? And so with this one, you all came up with some excellent ones. I really like this one here. What can we do to protect our natural resources? Even though it's a simple question, there's a lot to answer with that, right? So thank you for that. What we're gonna do next here is we're gonna start off and just pretend like, so we're gonna dive right into it. And we're gonna pretend that we are starting our lesson. And like you all noticed at the very beginning, let's start with the very basics. So let's get a feel for what do our students already know. So I'm a teacher, I'm going to present the students with this organizer, and I'm going to ask them, and if you're not familiar with Jamboard, you're going to want to click this arrow so that you're on the next frame and you see this. But what I would like you guys to do is just using a sticky note, what can you tell me about what you already know about natural resources? Maybe it's a definition, maybe it's examples of natural resources. But what do you already know about natural resources? How would you define this? So again, take a sticky note and just add in there, what do you already know? How could you define it? What are natural resources? Okay, they're not always infinite and they're not man-made. Perfect. What else can we add? So maybe we have definitions like, yes, thank you. Materials from nature, like minerals or forests. Perfect. They're not the same. Yes, that's true. Natural resources are not the same. That's an excellent thing to add. Okay. They're scarce. Yes. Perfect. All right. So they're needed. Yes. So we know natural resources can be scarce. They're not all the same. They come from nature. So we might use this tool to help the students develop just a a common definition of what are natural resources, right? Next, what I'm going to do is I'm going to move to the next slide. Okay, so again, we're about to dive in with students this week to address that one standard. So now we have an idea of what natural resources are. What are some examples of natural resources in Michigan? And now I'm on slide 3 of 5. So with the sticky note, can anybody add an example of natural resources in Michigan? Yes, the Great Lakes, that's an excellent one. Wildlife, yes. So maybe we can even elaborate on that. What types of wildlife? Iron ore, forests, wonderful. One sad little bubble here if anybody can add anything else. Okay, yes, the falls, awesome. Okay, so what are natural resources in Michigan? We have some ideas now, right? And so what we're going to do next, if I was teaching this lesson, is that we've worked as a class, we have some anchor charts going, and now what we're going to do is we are actually going to, let me just kind of click ahead here in my presentation so I'm on the right slide here. And so now what I would like us to do is let's actually, as a class, we're going to read our first article, okay? Kat's going to add it to the chat. She's just going to add it as a PDF, but it's also here on the screen if you'd like to just look at it with me. But what I'd like you to do, class, is please read through this first article, and then let's underline anything that stands out to you that feels important, okay? The examples of natural resources, threats to these natural resources, anything that stands out to you. And I know we're doing this virtually, so you can just write something down on a sheet of paper if you want to. So perfect. If you're still reading, no big deal. But what I would like us to do is, so we've talked about natural resources. We've talked about natural resources here in Michigan. Now what I'd like you to do is let's just take a minute and think about, you can pull from the article if you'd like to, but what are some threats to Michigan's natural resources? It can be things we already know or something we just read in the article, but what are some threats to Michigan's natural resources? I'm on slide 4 of 5. Tourism, wonderful. Industry, okay, fantastic. Invasive species, yes. I think of at least one more. Pollution, wonderful. Awesome. Climate change, yes, perfect. Okay, so we have some initial just threats to Michigan's natural environment. Again, if I was teaching this in a class, I'd be creating an anchor chart. The students might be following along with me. And so now what we're gonna do is I'm gonna show you a quick video, and I would love it if you don't mind noting anything additional. So maybe we could do like, if it's invasive species, is there an example of an invasive species that you hear in the video? If it's industry, is there an example of industry? Is there anything else we could add to this, right? So I'm gonna go ahead and play this little video for you, and let's see if we hear anything.
Michigan is a beautiful state with many natural resources, including timber, rich soil, and beautiful lakes and animals. And we all have a responsibility to help keep those natural resources around for future generations to enjoy. Many of them face serious threats such as pollution, fire, invasive species, and habitat destruction. The Department of Natural Resources works to investigate, study, and design plans to protect them from those things. Pollution is often caused by humans, and it can seriously hurt animals and the environment. One of the best things you can do is try to leave nature the way you found it. Large companies are taking steps to do the same and trying to leave less air and water pollution behind. For the timber industry, fire is always a threat. But did you know that fire is also necessary? It helps clear out brush and makes room for plants to thrive. The ash even naturally fertilizes soil. Instead of trying to stop all fires, the Michigan State Park System sometimes sets controlled fires, hoping to help the forest flourish while not allowing accidental fires to become dangerous wildfires that rage out of control. Invasive species are organisms that aren't from Michigan, but have somehow entered and have a negative impact on the environment. For example, the zebra mussel invaded Michigan waterways in 1988, causing problems for habitats and food webs, while also clogging water intakes and pipes for factories and power plants. In 2002, the emerald ash borer arrived and began killing ash trees, which are important to both the economy and the landscape. It's a difficult task to figure out how to get rid of invasive species. Habitat loss usually comes from humans who take over land from animals for houses, stores, schools, and other human needs. While these things are necessary, it's important to evaluate the end result and decide if there's a better way or place to make changes to the environment. Protecting the wildlife and land of Michigan will keep it a beautiful place to live for future generations.
Awesome. So let's go back to this and see if there's anything else we can add after watching that quick video. Is there an example of an invasive species? Or is there another threat that maybe we didn't include? I know it takes a minute to toggle back and forth, so I want to give everybody some time. But let's see if we can add at least two more things to this. Two more sticky notes. Ash tree beetle, zebra mussels, thank you. Yep, and so these are examples of invasive species. So I'm going to put these over here by this little bubble, right? When they talked about fire, so maybe we want to put that in its own bubble. Maybe we want to put it by climate change. With pollution, we talked about human pollution versus factory pollution. And so we can add all of these different things and really create this web for the students so that they have this great kind of idea generating platform to pull from as we're going to the next part of the activity. Okay, so what I'm gonna have students do next is we're actually going to take this, and again, our goal is to work through each one, right? So right now we're looking at geography. Maybe we're going to talk about how civics can be a big part of this. Oh, sorry. And then we're going to get the students to really pull from all of these different resources and start to generate their own ideas. Okay, so I'm going to kind of pause here, and I'd love us to just kind of think about, what did the students do so far? Okay, what have we done so far with the students? And again, you can either unmute or just add it to the chat, whatever is easiest for you. But what have we asked students to do? And then what knowledge and thinking skills did they demonstrate so far? And then maybe you want to even answer this question. So what did the teacher do? What have I done so far as the teacher? Again, I'm just kind of kickstarting this lesson. We're just diving into it. But what did I do? And then how did the instructional strategies possibly impact student learning so far? Okay, so I'm going to move over and just kind of look at the chat. So yes, we were asked to read. We were asked to express prior knowledge. We asked them to grow what they already knew. So thank you very much, Kelly, for saying that. Prior knowledge, exactly. Students had to organize their ideas based on different prompts. Fantastic. Thank you. You guys are so on it. I really appreciate it. So perfect. Just a quick pause and reflect. What have we done so far? So now as a teacher, what I'm going to do next is I'm going to have them break things apart. So now we're going to dive a little bit deeper into this, right? So if you're not super familiar with Studies Weekly, the way it's set up is we have all 32 weeks come at once, and the students have the ability. So here's what the print would look like if I was to hold this up. It looks something like this. And you'll notice that all these different articles, again, Kat added this PDF to the chat, and Kat, if you don't mind adding it again, just so we have it. What we're going to do is I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to assign different groups, different articles so that they can dive a little bit deeper. Okay. For the sake of time, I'm not going to ask you guys to do this, but what I would like us to do here, okay, let's keep going here, is I might, as the teacher, break it apart. Sorry, I keep moving around on you guys. Break it apart a little bit more. So again, for the sake of time, we're not going to go ahead and do this, but I just kind of want to talk through how it's set up and give you all a chance to take a look at the at what I'm asking of the students here. So maybe I divide it up where group one, they're going to be an expert group on pollution, right? And then we have a group on invasive species and another group on industrial activities. And so Jigsaw is something we're all pretty familiar with, but if you're not, how I set it up in my classroom is I would group my students into groups of 3 or 4. And then that would be their original home-based group. I'd assign them numbers. So group student 1, you're going to research pollution. Student 2, you're going to research invasive species. And what's going to happen then is they're going to go off into these different groups, work together, become experts, and then bring it back to their home group. Okay. So Kat added this Jigsaw graphic organizer template to the chat. So if you wanted to ever use this in your classroom, you are more than welcome to. Again, you don't necessarily need Studies Weekly to be able to use this. So I wanted to make sure you could see it. And then at the very end, we're asking students in the expert group to add a little illustration. What's something they could do to make it easier for the other members of their home-based group to make sense of what they've learned, okay? And so when the students come back, and you know what, I don't want to explain this, but what is the value in, I want you guys to explain it, what is the value in having students work this sort of way when it comes to doing research? If you don't mind, let's ask a few of you instead of me just saying it. I'd love to hear from you since we have such wonderful teachers in the session today. What is something that students could benefit from by doing research this way? Float the chat so I can see it. Yes, collaboration. Thank you. And think about inquiry. What's something they're going to learn about inquiry this way? Writing skills. Yes. Thank you, Sarah. They'll learn how to do research. Thank you, Nicole. That's wonderful. Reasoning skills. Yes. How do I pull out what's important? How do I then make sense of it with my group so that they know what they were supposed to learn and I can share and communicate? You guys are all spot on. So thank you. So when it comes to inquiry, this Jigsaw graphic organizer, even though it seems super simple, it makes it more manageable. Yes, it breaks down the parts. Thank you, Frank. And it also puts a lot of the heavy lifting on the students, right? So They're the ones being the experts. They're the ones trying to make sense of it. And so we're just using these different articles in Studies Weekly to have them think about threats to Michigan's environment. So again, we're trying to take it all back to this main standard. Okay, so from here, just again, if you're not super familiar with Studies Weekly, the way it's going to get set up is then we're going to ask the students to share their findings. You could have them do a gallery walk where they're going around and they're sharing that way. Or you can just say, as a group, what I'd like you to do is come up with some different things that you can do to help save Michigan's natural resources, right? Maybe the students are creating posters, or you're having them write a letter to their local government, whatever you're asking them to do. There are organizers to kind of help think through this. And again, they're using all of their research to take action. So that's dimension 4 of the C3 framework, right? So when we think about inquiry and the arc of inquiry, I often have people think of this big, large project, when in reality, it's really just kind of walking students through what is the big question we're trying to answer? How do we then gather the research and all of these different findings? And then how do we take action on what we've discovered as a group, right? Or as an individual. So that's how we would flow through just one quick lesson all on protecting Michigan's environment. But of course, depending on how much time we have, there are always some really great ways to even elevate these conversations even further. So what is something you might add to this lesson to make it yours, to even, again, elevate it to one step further? What's something you might add or ask the students to do with this? Oops, sorry. I'm just going to kind of go to the chat and see what everybody's saying here. So how might you add to this? Again, think about that standard where they provided examples to us. Is there an activity? Is there additional information? What might you add to this lesson? Have students work to find possible solutions that they've read. Take action project. Wonderful. I might add a writing element to persuade others to protect the environment. Fantastic. Hands-on examples of natural resources. That's a really, really cool idea, Nicole. Thank you. A geo inquiry. Okay, wonderful. Perfect. Thank you, Sarah. And maybe you're even bringing in news articles, right? What are some local news articles? So we talked about that standards asking, how does the local government protect them? How do tribal governments protect natural resources? And so maybe what you're doing is you're just finding some local articles on different natural resources and things that are happening around you that you can add to that, to this particular lesson, right? And just kind of drive it home even more. What are people already doing, and how can you help? So wonderful, thank you. Since I do have some friends who are familiar with Studies Weekly, I'm just wanted to quickly show you, if you have access to the print or just anything, so maybe you're asking the students to print off images or things like that. One of the great things about Studies Weekly is that you can actually cut apart the publications. So we talked about, I think it was Frank that said this, and how it allows for collaboration, just the activities that we did. So one of the great things about Studies Weekly is that because it's set up in the way it is, students are able, they have this great big platform and this great big tool in front of them where they can really point out images and point out different things that they're reading when they're talking to each other. But again, you could do this with pretty much anything. You could have the students, let's find some main ideas, right? What are we noticing? You could have them create graphic organizers. interactive notebooks to kind of make sense of what are natural resources, what are some different examples that I've learned. And then you have, of course, the images as different anchor charts. Maybe we're making pop-ups. So Sarah, if you're having them do like a geo-inquiry portion of it, maybe they're creating pop-ups with whatever images that they're finding online or something to really kind of drive home what it is that you're doing. Okay, so because we don't have, I know we only have about, let's check my time here. We'll say 10 minutes or so I can leave some room for questions at the end. Because the session does tie with Studies Weekly, I know I would have some friends that were familiar with Studies Weekly. I did just want to leave some time to just kind of learn more and dive into how it's addressed. So Sarah, I don't know what grade level you teach, but this will kind of also show you just what does it look like in the other grade levels. So the way Studies Weekly sets up inquiry is we have all of our sixth grade, thank you, Sarah. We have all of the publications set up so that all the lessons are designed to support inquiry. Like we just walked through the arc of inquiry. They're designed to set up that way. But we also have them embedded so that inquiry is directly embedded within the Studies Weekly publications. So for our lower grade levels, we're asking students like, how do we ask questions? How do we look at evidence? And then for the primary grade levels, just what is inquiry? Like, what is a simple question? How do we kind of gather the evidence? What are the next steps, right? So these are embedded directly within Studies Weekly. The next thing you're going to notice is we ask students to make a claim, right? So we might provide sentence stems like, I notice in this photograph we can see. I notice, like in what we just did, I noticed in this article, we talked about this, or the video, they showed this. And then we're using different lenses, right? So how might a geographer approach what we just talked about? How might an economist approach what we just talked about when it came to natural resources? What about someone with well-being? So maybe we're talking about something like environmental racism, where are these factories located? When we're talking about local communities, how does it impact the people who live there, right? So we look at things from all these different lenses, and we help students think through how do different individuals approach these problems so that when we are taking action, we can think about it from all these different angles. And then up here, of course, we're talking about different compelling and supporting questions. And then when it gets to multiple perspectives, so this is actually coming from fifth grade, but we're trying really hard to show there are multiple perspectives to everything, right? So when we're talking about westward expansion, and I know that's not necessarily fifth grade, but at least not here in Michigan, but you'll see different perspectives. So what's the perspective of someone who's an Indigenous person? What's the perspective of someone who is going west for land, right? And then how do we promote responsible research? How do we incorporate these historical thinking skills like close reading, collaboration, sourcing, all of these different things that you guys talked about when we were first walking through that model lesson. And again, this is just what I kind of walked through earlier, but how can we look through the different lenses, the 5 different lenses of social studies to think about inquiry? And I have this example here on the Bill of Rights. So a historian might ask, why were the Bill of Rights created, right? When we're thinking about compelling questions. We might ask students, what might a geographer ask, right? So how does the Bill of Rights impact decisions about the environment or where people live? Okay. So these are just a really great way to kind of get students thinking about social studies from multiple lenses. And why is that? Of course, we can't expect all learners to be experts in all fields, but it helps the novice researcher think through things. Okay, so you'll also notice that we're encouraging learners to take action. So pretty much every single thing we're doing, and as teachers, everything we're doing, so whether it's Studies Weekly related or not, we're hoping that students can get to this 4th dimension of Well, now how do you take action? How can I support you in thinking through finding research, and then the now what? We have this information, so now what? Okay. Writing. So several of you were talking about writing as something you might add to really elevate that conversation. How do we teach students? And within Studies Weekly, we're using RAFT a whole lot, right? So what is the role of the writer? Who is the audience you're trying to reach? What is the format? Is it a letter? Is it a speech? What's the topic you're trying to address? And then we're asking students to persuade somebody, right? What is your reasoning? What evidence do you have? And so you all were spot on when you were talking about this is one way to elevate students. And again, this is at the heart of inquiry. How do we get them asking questions and then really diving into it? Okay. And then Studies Weekly, for those of you who just are curious and learning more, we also have specific topics where we're flowing through the inquiry process, right? So we might ask the compelling question, is the Electoral College necessary? We're following the C3 teachers research. And so just to kind of show you how this is set up, so you have some background knowledge, and then it's going to break it up into supporting questions. So what was the purpose of the Electoral College? Students are then asked to kind of read one of these excerpts and work in different groups. And then everything is driven by a performance task in these weeks. So we read through it, but now let's write down some evidence, right? And you'll notice that it's differences, right? So we might have documents, we might have quotes, we might have excerpts from different primary sources. And then, of course, I have this little mic drop here, but all the documents can be read aloud.
U.S. Constitution, Article 2, Section 1. The executive power shall be vested in a President of the United States of America. He shall hold his office during the term of 4 years, and, together with the Vice President, chosen for the same term, be elected as follows. Each state shall appoint, in such a manner as the legislature thereof may direct, a number of electors.
Okay. And my recording got a little behind, so I apologize about that. But as teachers, we all know when we're asked students, regardless of the grade level, to read primary text, sometimes the vocabulary can get a little tricky for them. So it's helpful to have that audio of what is the text, right? What is this actually saying? Thank you. I see someone right. Well, that's exciting for second grade. Yes, it is. And then let's see. So we talked about maps. We've talked about charts. So within Studies Weekly and in our inquiry units, they're embedded throughout, but we actually have these resources that in these weeks dedicated just to inquiry. And you'll notice if you're familiar with the inquiry design model, this is kind of modeled after that, but it gives students an opportunity to, how do we analyze a map? How do we analyze a chart, right? And so all of these different resources are available. And again, the whole goal is to question everything when it comes to inquiry. How do we create questions and ask students to really think about what they're learning? I'm going to kind of open the floor up now for questions since we have about 5 minutes or so left, and just kind of get a sense of what was some takeaway, what was a takeaway from today? Are there any other questions, things like that? And then if they're not, I'll kind of.
Sorry, just a quick question. The students themselves are able to access the Studies Weekly both digitally and they have a physical magazine, correct?
That is 100% correct. Yes.
Awesome.
Yes. And all of our resources right now, if you teach, well, 6th grade included as well, but K-5 is as Michigan specific as you can get. If you go to Studies Weekly online, you're actually able to set up an account for yourself and use it for the end of the school year. I know M-Step is coming up, so even if I have some 5th grade teachers and they want to pull from third and 4th grade, you're welcome to do that. And really just take a look at it, and you can use it with your students to wrap up.
Another question for you. I have a 2nd grade team that's kind of intrigued by this as I'm talking with them. And they're wondering, what is the preset up to each lesson? Because we have several where we started, and then the amount of time we're spending with the planning and prep for a lesson, it's like, this is overwhelming. Is it really close to what you just showed us?
Yes. Yes. So the way it's set up, and I'm just going to go to Studies Weekly. Why not? What you're going to notice, since everybody can get in, is, and I'll just go to a 2nd grade publication to show you here. So if we were to click on 2nd grade, what you're going to see is these are all of the weeks. So all 32 weeks come at once. Let's pick one. So say we were talking about, I don't know, goods and services. We'll just pick one. The way it's set up is you're going to notice that you have all these articles. These match what come in print. And then you'll see that there are videos like how I just walked you through it. And then the lesson plans are set up in such a way that you'll notice, so we have background knowledge and all of that. But once you get to the heart of it, just kind of skip down here, is you'll see that this is the publication. And then it's going to walk through, so Article 2. Let's write down the words goods and services. So all I really did was pull directly from Studies Weekly lesson plan. And what's really nice is you can expand or contract the amount of time you spend on a particular week, depending on how much time you have. So you could go as in-depth as really having the students write articles and let's make posters, or it can be short and sweet. Let's read through it. Let's watch some videos and then discuss a quick, how might we take action, or something like that. Excellent question. Any other questions from the group while I have everybody here? And then who was it? Kelly, you wrote something, how exciting for 2nd grade. The way that you're going to see this here, right? So everything can be read aloud to the students regardless of the grade level.
When you sell something, you are a producer. When you buy something, you are a consumer.
And we divided things up during our lesson with using the jigsaw. And so you could even have students do that virtually, especially if you want to try it virtually, where maybe they're highlighting key things or key things that they want to bring back to their home base group, and they're highlighting it in these different colors, right? So they can still most certainly interact with the text online if you don't have the print in front of you just yet. Okay. Awesome. And we have 2 minutes left. So are there any other questions based on what we did, or just feedback that you had? And if you don't want to unmute, please feel free to add it to the chat. But thank you so much for your time, and thank you for all you're doing for students and fellow teachers. And I just really appreciate you. So thank you so much for your time tonight.